Welcome to Time Travelling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every story of Doctor Who right from the very beginning. I'm Paddy.
And I'm Tricia. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. As opposed to our normal format of reviewing a Doctor Who story and then discussing the Doctor, the companions, the villains, and the story overall, today we're going to take a focus on one of our companions in particular, that being Susan Foreman. So Paddy and I are going to discuss what we liked about the character, what we didn't like about the character, and so on. And then we'll also have a little bit of a discussion towards the end about just how we're finding this whole podcast thing, to be honest, since we've started it and we're now at the end of our first companion. Yeah. Paddy, do you want to share our socials for anyone who wants to get involved in the conversation?
Absolutely. So guys, if you want to get in touch with us and have chats about the previous episodes or any upcoming episode, you can find us at Time Teamp, that's TIMETEAMP on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or you can email us at timetravelingteam@teamproductions.com. Cool.
So this is going to be a bit more freeform. We don't have a script. Usually we have a script for these things. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat, Paddy. What? Okay, we'll go with strengths, weaknesses, high point, low point. Okay, so that can be our basic structure. We have to have something, otherwise we'd be rambling for ages, which is why this is called a rambling in the TARDIS. But there's rambling and there's getting lost.
Yeah.
So what do you think is Actually, before we get into strengths, what was your sort of elevator pitch overall impression of Susan? So elevator pitch, what's your impression?
So first of all, I'll ask you to explain to me what elevator pitch is.
So elevator pitch is if you had to explain something in the time it takes to use an elevator.
Oh, right, fair enough. So my hot take on Susan, yeah?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so Susan, I think, is a character that makes you want to know more about her. She just has that, from the minute that she's introduced, she has that level of intrigue that it's like, I want to know more about you. You can't help but also kind of fall in love with her a small bit, because at the end of the day, she's still like she's an alien, but she's a 16-year-old alien, so it's just fun to see her being introduced to the world of teeny boppers and whatnot. But it's just like, unfortunately, the way that the character went may not have been the best, but at the same time, there's limitless potential, and thankfully that's explored in the expanded media, which I would highly recommend people to check out.
Yeah. So
Ding.
Mine would be very similar. I think Susan is a character that had great potential, some of which we did get to see, not all of it, and we'll discuss that in a bit, but we did get to see some of her potential. She, being the alien of the crew, and the younger alien of the crew, I'll put it that way, there was so much they could play with, and Caroline Ford did a really good job of bringing that otherworldliness across with her. She's someone that you very much want to just wrap up in a blanket and give a cuddle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which, some people think that makes companions weak. I disagree. So yeah, overall I think she had great potential. We got to see some of it. And to your point, yes, exploring the character in expanded media, highly recommend.
I agree with you about the whole weakness thing. It's just like, just because a character makes you want to protect them doesn't mean they're not an interesting character. Like,
yeah, definitely. So let's go on to her strengths. What do you think is Susan's biggest strength?
So she actually has kind of two, I would say, and one, like the first one is she has a very kind and compassionate nature. That, like, she loves her grandfather, she loves Ian and Barbara. She would do anything for them. And like, even like the people that she meets along the way, like Ping Cho in Marco Polo, like, again, someone that she really had a lot of fun with, and maybe like kind of saw a bit of herself in Ping Cho and really wanted to kind of just look after her. The other strength, the one thing I notice, is that she can be very, very determined in her ideals, like we saw in the Aztecs, where it was literally a case of, I'm not going to be married to no one. Not unless I pick him.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so like I think like those would be the key areas, like her firm belief in her ideals and her kind and compassionate nature to the people that she cares about.
Yeah, I think for me with Susan, her strengths are definitely, like, her kind and compassionate nature is definitely something that stands out. the way I would describe Susan is that she is someone who loves with her whole heart.
Mm.
I get the feeling that there's very few people that she just likes.
Don't you? Sorry, Ross. Don't you mean hearts?
We don't know that yet.
Oh, shh.
But I get the feeling that like she's the type of person where if she likes you, she loves you with her whole heart. And we see that in how quickly she connects with Ian and Barbara, and how every time she thinks that they're going to be leaving, she gets really upset about it because she likes their time together, and I imagine she sees them as kind of like this weird, quirky little family that flies around in space and time.
Sounds oddly familiar, with the exception of space and time.
The other thing I really like about the character, and I would consider a strength, is while it wasn't consistent, and I'm sure we'll get to this in a little bit, I do think her character did develop in leaps and bounds in certain stories. You mentioned the Aztecs, which was great to see her standing up for herself, but also the Sensorites, where not only was she standing up for herself against her grandfather, though she did eventually follow his advice, but she was starting to make decisions for the group with her best intentions and the knowledge that she had and the ability she had to make decisions. And then we see it in the story we discussed on Monday, which is in the Dalek invasion of Earth, where she very much stands behind her ideals and, tells the Doctor, no, this is, we should be going north, we should be doing this, we should be doing this. And she's very strong. And it's a strength we didn't see at the beginning.
Mm.
The other thing as well, to your point about her being very kind and gentle, is with her friendship with Pink Show.
Yeah.
Pink Show has a particular plot point that we see kind of directed at Susan in the Aztecs, which is arranged marriage. And we can tell in the Aztecs that Susan is 110% against it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she does not even entertain the notion. And we see in her interaction with Ping Cho that, we get that inkling from that interaction. But the thing I love about her is that she doesn't hold it against Ping Cho.
No.
She kind of laughs about it a little bit in a sort of 16-year-old girly kind of way. But she never makes Ping Cho feel bad about it. She never sort of says, oh my god, I can't believe you're going to do this. She supports her in the way a friend should.
Yeah. And, like, as well, it's when they're parting, I think a small part of it is down to the fact of, like, I'm leaving a friend behind, but I'm leaving a friend behind when she needs me, type thing.
Yeah. I think, if Susan could have, she would have taken Ping Show with her. And Ping Show would have travelled with them if Susan had that authority. I can't remember. I think it was in the first episode, wasn't it? Where Ian says to Barbara that Barbara's the type of person who has like a flat full of cats.
Yeah.
Or a flat full of strays.
A flat full of strays, yeah. Just, which is like a complimentary insult, maybe?
Yeah. I think Susan is the same.
Yeah.
Susan, like I said, she loves with her whole heart. I think she would do anything to protect her friends.
Grandfather, can we keep her? Can we please?
I'll feed her and walk her every day.
Yep. No. Like those are the moments that kind of put a smile on your face when you're watching the early days of the show.
Yeah. So those are her strengths. We have to look at the other side of the coin.
Yes.
Her weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, I think the biggest weakness for Susan, in my opinion, is her inconsistency.
Yes.
Like I said, one of the things I have down as a strength for her is how she did grow. But the problem was, it was like in peaks and troughs. 1 minute she's being super independent and is clearly, taking onus on her own life, and she's has authority for her own self. And in the next, she's gone like 5 steps backwards, which makes it really hard to track that development, because you're constantly like, oh, she's just screaming again, or she's losing her mind because the doctor's not there again, or something like that. You know, an example of that would be like, we went from the Sensorites, where, like we said, she was, you know, trying to make independent decisions, though she took advice and retracted them later, but she was making independent decisions, she was taking onus of her own life. And then contrast that with Reign of Terror,
where, as I made the joke before, she's lost the will to live type scenario. She's fading away.
Yeah, and I think the thing about that bothers me is that it really does a disservice, A, to the character, who could have been amazing, but also to Caroline Ford, who we see is an amazing actress, and they just give her very little to work with.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because there are times where she's just really shoved to the background. Yeah. And it's like, like, you have 4 core characters, and as I can't remember what episode I said it on, but the fact that you have development for 3 of those 4 and not for the last one, it's a bit of like a kick in the teeth, because you've given us like a taste of the potential of this character, and you make her into like the token screaming damsel in distress. Because I remember saying in Daleks, like, that one of the iconic images coming from Daleks was Barbara being cornered by an oncoming Dalek. And I think that kind of painted Old Who to outside, like, to kind of, you know, casual outside viewers looking in the sort of all the women did was scream type scenario. But it also, I think, unfairly maligned Barbara. Now, I know that we're talking about Susan, but in the episodes to come, if you were to pick a damsel in distressy type character, unfortunately that role fell to Susan during her troughs phase of her peaks and troughs, and it just didn't seem fair to Caroline Ford.
Yeah, I think you'd actually discussed that when we were discussing the aired version of An Unearthly Child.
Yeah.
Where, like, the minute the doctor gets taken away from her in that first story, she completely breaks down, screaming her head off. I think I asked you at the time, you know, people blame Barbara, but is Susan actually the stereotypical screaming companion?
Yeah, I think for, while she may not be the most famous screaming companion, she's definitely the first of the screaming companions.
Yeah, and I think I don't mind that, actually. I mean, jumping several years into the future to another companion, one of my favorites, Elizabeth Sladen, who played Sarah Jane, always said that she never minded the screaming bit, because the situations that she was in, or her character was in, were scary. Of course you would scream. And the way she described it was, if that happened to me, I would scream my head off. So I don't mind Susan being a screaming companion in that context. What I mind is that she goes from being super strong to screaming, to super strong to screaming, to, you know, super optimistic and we can do anything, to I've lost the will to live.
Yeah. Like, yeah, like, there's like what, like, obviously that'll come up in the high points and low points discussion, but it is like literally the case of, she almost comes across to me like, you know, I haven't read it in years, but was it Marvin, the depressed android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Like, what's the point of even trying type thing?
Yeah, actually, she does.
Sans the Alan Rickman impression, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, Susan's weaknesses are, they're just how to put it? Susan's weaknesses highlight bad writing.
Yeah. Which is again kind of a shame, because we've said that there are certain stories where Susan is, you know, she's not portrayed in the best way that she can be, but those are in some really good stories.
Yeah, and
like we talked recently about like Reign of Terror, how much we enjoyed it, which had some really good moments in it, and therefore like it's a sign of good writing. But then we have Susan, who's not done really well, so therefore it's a case of bad writing.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's like they thought she was this weird afterthought of, oh, what the hell will we do with her today? Well, I think the worst thing was that you can't help but compare her to Barbara
Yeah.
as the two women in the group. And I think the writers, and this is just my read of the situation, right? And if any of them ever listen to this, you're welcome to come on and tell me I'm wrong. I think the writers looked at each story, and maybe it was individual episodes or the story as a whole, and was like, okay, we have Barbara doing this strong thing, or we want to show Barbara being protective, so Susan has to be weak. We want to show Barbara being intelligent and, like in the case of Reign of Terror, thinking her way out of the box, so Susan can't be involved. It wasn't like that for all of them, like the Aztecs, but in the Aztecs the characters were separated at that point.
Yeah.
But I think in the scenes where they have together, it was like, well, we don't want Barbara to be breaking down, so Susan has to break down. Like, if you actually go back to An Unearthly Child, the more I think about it, when Susan breaks down, Barbara is strong. And when Barbara breaks down, Susan is strong.
There's actually one thing that just kind of came into my head there. We were like, talking about, only one of them can be strong at a time, like in some sort of weird Highlander type thing. When in Keys of Marinus, when Susan and Sabitha are separated, like Sabitha is like the companion of the story.
Yeah.
Yet she's the one that's holding it together, whereas Susan goes to pieces. And again, I think that's just a further, it's just a further poor portrayal of Susan, or poor writing on Susan's part, which is like, why do you give all the power to the story-based companion and not the one that's been with us now for X amount of weeks?
Yeah. I think, something like that was a prime example of where Susan could have, shown what she learned from Barbara and Ian or something like that, and we didn't get to see it. So we discussed a little bit, some of the major plot points that Susan was part of, but let's go into a bit more detail. What for you was the high point of Susan's tenure on the TARDIS?
So, this took me a lot of time to kind of come up with, and for me, there was 3 events that happened that made me think, this is the type of Susan that I like to see. So I think I might go from 3 to 1, if that's okay.
Yep, go ahead.
So, number 3 is when she ran screaming like a lunatic into the middle of a herd of cavemen to save her grandfather, not knowing what exactly was going to happen, but as in some sort of weird kamikaze attack. Leave the old man alone! Followed very closely by protective Barbara and a very confused Ian. But because that showed to me the sort of reckless abandon. And it takes an awful lot of courage to have that much reckless abandon, I think, at that age. That's just from my perspective. The second one is, oddly enough, this is like the most continuous stretch of a strong performance from her, and it's the Sensorites. Standing up for herself against her grandfather, I thought was great. Then, like, kind of really showing her her telepathic abilities, and it was just an amazing overall performance from Susan. Like her one-on-one time with the First Elder discussing unnamed planet soon to be called Gallifrey, and just like her overall sense of power. But the episode, the moment that kind of tipped it off for me, or took it off for me, was her firm stance in the Aztecs about, I'm not going to marry him just because you say I should marry him. And the reason I have that at number 1 is because she's alone, she's isolated deliberately from the others, and she's aware that there's an ulterior motive to her being separated from the others, yet she never backs down and never relies on, grandfather or Ian or Barbara will save me. It's, I'm here by myself, I'm standing on my own 2 feet. So that, for me, I think is her strongest moment across the tenure of the show.
Very good. So I'll do my 3 to 1.
Yeah.
Since we're doing it that way. So at number 3 for me, we have her most recent outing and her final outing in Dalek Invasion of Earth. Now, I mentioned during the week that I think the romantic subplot was a bit rushed. Not as rushed as it could have been, but it was a little bit rushed in my opinion. However, I think we see her in her interactions with David and in her interactions with her grandfather. I think we see the best development of her character. She had more development in that one story than she'd had in the previous 10.
Yeah.
And I think it worked really, really well. I think her standing up to the Doctor, like, it wasn't like in previous stories when she stands up to him and she's kind of whining like a child. She was presenting her arguments as an adult.
Yeah.
And that for me was a great step forward for that character. Number 2 is an interesting choice, I would say.
All right.
But it has been my favorite acting moment from Susan since I first started watching the first Doctor 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is in The Edge of Destruction.
The scissors scene.
The scissors. It's not a high point for the character because she's absolutely loopy, but it's a high point in terms of it was some amazing acting, and it really brought out that alienness that I really wanted to see more of. And whenever I think of Susan, and this might sound weird, I think of her brandishing that pair of scissors coming at Ian, and there's the shadow, and the way it was done was so, so good. And it might seem weird that I'm considering that a high point, but for me, it's the bit that sticks with me the most. I don't think of her screaming. I didn't even realize she screamed that much until we went back and rewatched this in order.
Yeah.
That's what stuck with me.
And once again, we must highlight the dangers of playing with scissors.
Yes, do not play with scissors, and do not try and stab people with scissors. That is bold. Number 1 for me, it's the same as you. It's the Sensorites. I think, while Dalek Invasion of Earth, I think, had the most consistent development of her character. I think it took her as far as she could possibly go. The Sensorites is where we really saw that potential.
So your number 1 is my number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Aztecs was great, and the bits of Marco Polo were great, and that was fine. But for me, the Sensorites was really, okay, this is more than just teenage rebellion against authority. Which I think, from a certain point of view, you could view the Aztecs bit as. For me, the Sensorites was really, okay, she's starting to make her own choices, weighing the pros and cons. Now, again, like I said, her choice wasn't the best, and she did end up backing down.
Yeah.
But it was the beginning of her making choices as an adult that we see come to fruition in Dalek Invasion of Earth.
Don't let the pinafore and knee socks fool you. I'm standing my ground.
Exactly. I mean, I said it at the time that, she looked her most childish.
Yeah.
But to that point in the show, it was her behaving as a woman and not as a child. And like you said, her conversations with the First Elder, her conversations on trust and how it has to be earned, which when we discussed in earlier episodes, she tended to trust too quickly at the beginning. And so her taking the things that she had learned and using that to help other people grow, for me, that was the standout performance.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 7 or 8 more times. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's why, that's what it was a very close run thing for me with my between the Sensorites and the Aztecs. But I suppose it was just to have all what she kind of, her ideals and everything she stood for, condensed into just one solid couple of scenes in Aztecs. It just tipped the post. But then again, sorry, you go on. Blah, 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 blah.
I was going to say, I think if Caroline Ford hadn't been off on holidays in the Aztecs, and we had seen more of that, I probably would have ranked it higher. Yeah.
No, yeah, it's always weird, because you were on it before, about how strange it is that actors take holidays in the middle of a story, as opposed to. Because I made the reference before, say Star Trek. You could miss war for Geordi for an episode because okay, the guys are on holidays, whereas when it's in the middle of a story, it just seems it's that much more jarring. So, but the pre-filmed inserts I think help, because unlike Barbara in Sensorites, when she's up there in Thunderbird 5, we don't really see her in the missing episodes.
Yeah, so we've talked about our favourite moments, our high points for Susan. Again, we got to flip that coin.
I think from going forward we should do the low points first before then we can finish on a high note.
Well, no, because I do want to talk about her overall in a
Yeah,
second. So we can end on a high at that point.
So do you want to do a 3-2-1 again, or do you just want to like just leave it at the number one top spot?
Do you have it? Do you have a 3-2-1? I have a 2-1. I don't know if I have a 3-2-1.
I think I have a 2-1 as well.
Okay, you go first. What's yours?
Okay, so number 2 is Reign of Terror, where it's they're in the jail cell and Barbara's like, come on, we can get out of here. Come on, we can get out of here. And Susan's just like, oh, what's the point? What's the point? It's just like you do want to kind of just grab her and shake her and like do that whole airplane sequence of getting a row of people to slap her in the face to, you know, get her to calm down. But yeah, I just thought like that was like, it was either a case of lazy writing, or if this is like what you envisioned for the character, like, dear God in heaven. Yeah, no, that for me is a pretty bad moment. But the number one spot for low points is what was it, episode 4 of Keys of Marinus, where she's with Sabetha in the ice cave. And it's like, this is the time for Susan to shine, because, you know, she's had all these adventures, and Sabetha, who has been under hypnosis for an extended amount of time, takes the lead, and it just felt very off for me, and I didn't particularly like it. And yeah, that's my number one low point for Susan, I think.
Yeah, so I agree on your points, but I had them the other way around. So I would have put Keys of Marinus in the 2 point, and the reason why is I agree completely that we had Susan alone with a story-based companion. You know, everything tells you this is your time to give her some development.
Yeah.
The only saving grace it has, and this is a limited saving grace, but the only saving grace it has is that Sabetha is older than her and is a native of this planet.
Yeah.
That's the only saving grace it has, but it is a small saving grace. And I think how damsel in distressy she is in that story is nowhere near as bad as in the Reign of Terror. I think her breakdown with Sabetha is, and it wasn't even just with Sabetha, like her freak out in the Screaming Jungle, I think wasn't great either. And even in episode 2, when the story where they first meet Sabetha, or the episode rather where they first meet Sabetha, she's very much behaving like a small child. Like, she gets so upset when Barbara doesn't like her dress, and you know, she's very childish in that story.
Yeah.
Which I didn't like. The reason why Rain picks gets the top pick for me is it came off the back of the Sensorites. It came off the back of her strongest performance. And like I said, it's 1 step forward, 50 steps back. I think for Keys, it isn't as obvious, because although we said that Marco Polo was a good story for her, I think because we didn't actually watch it, as in, we didn't watch the acting, we just heard it, the slip back in Keys for me didn't seem as prominent. But the slip back between Sensorites and Reign of Terror, I mean, it's a completely different character. Reign of Terror, I get it. She's upset. She thinks the doctor died in a fire. That's terrifying. But the girl does nothing for the entire story. They get captured. She freaks out, becomes completely pessimistic on everything. You know, I've lost the will to live, like you said. Eventually helps Barbara, then freaks out when there's rats. I'm like, dude, like, you've been to alien planets and rats freak you out? No, rats would make me piss my pants, but that's beside the point. You know, but like, this was a chance of escape, and they didn't use it. Then the bit in the cart, like, when Barbara's like, okay, we can run, and she's like, oh no, go without me. I was like, dude, grow a pair, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, you were so strong literally 3 episodes ago. Like, if you were watching this in the 60s, you're like, 3 weeks ago you were amazing. What happened to you?
I just had a funny thought enter my head. Like, there's a scene from an episode of The Simpsons where, like, it's the barbecue episode where, like, Lisa takes the pig and Marge just screams out, Bart, no. And Bart's like, I'm right here. Sorry, I just assumed it was you. I can imagine like a Doctor Who version is, we have to go rescue Susan. I'm right here. Oh, sorry, I just assumed it was you.
Yeah, and that we shouldn't have to think that about this character.
No.
But the more I think about it, actually, did she do anything in Reign of Terror?
No, like she didn't, because they wrote it that she got fever somehow. But the minute that they get separated from the Doctor and they get captured, she just feels like. Do you remember the way I was kind of saying about Jenny in Dalek Invasion of Earth? It just felt like a test of a character, that sort of the pessimistic character that's kind of token. It felt like Susan was fulfilling that role here. And yeah, she doesn't really contribute at all, I don't think.
Yeah, and it's like, this was no, obviously it wasn't written as the last story of the season, and we discussed that at the time, but Rain was shown as the last story of the season.
Yeah.
That was a bad note to end it on. I completely get why Caroline Ford was pissed.
Yeah, and I think that, in days like certain shows, like when they're returning for a second season, they do like an audience demographic to see which characters they should bring back and which they should leave out. I get the feeling that had this been applicable back then, yeah, Susan would have been axed.
Yeah.
That's just from my perspective again, like, so.
So I suppose this takes us to our overall thoughts. So we've given the elevator pitch at the top of the episode, but like, what do you think about Susan, how she left, and what Caroline Ford brought to the character?
So, one thing I will say about Caroline Ford is that she is a fantastic actress. Absolutely amazing. Like, the scissor scene, which we talked about, it's incredibly creepy. Like, we've said that the woman can play alien, like, ethereal alien creepy child like no one else that I've seen in a very long time. She's like, her discussion with the First Elder, she speaks with such passion about her home planet that, like, you're there going, I hope you find it someday. that type of thing. And she played her both like really well as a child, but also in her it's time to be an adult type moments. So Caroline Ford, I think, definitely left a legacy with that character, because whatever about the humans, but whatever about Ian and Barbara, like being, I suppose, the gateway characters for the audience in terms of the level of technology and understanding, Susan was definitely the gateway character for the children in the audience. And I think that when they redressed her from the unaired pilot to the unearthly child that went to show, I think they were really onto something there, and they really had a good influence for the kids, I think. In terms of the character and her leaving, it's a very kind of a bittersweet thing, because like, she's torn between two choices, and that choice is made for her, which we talked about a couple of days ago. And like, I suppose it is a shame. Like, I get I think it's like, in one sense it's kind of sweet that the Doctor did what he did, because he knew that she would be lonely and he'd grow to resent himself for if she came with him. But at the end of the day, like, it would have been nice for her to maybe, go up to the TARDIS and then run away from it again to David, and the Doctor just then kind of went, right, she's made her decision type thing. It's not the worst departure a companion has had, nor would I consider it to be one of the best. So at the moment, it's kind of hard to grade where I think Susan lands in like the spectrum of companions. We'd have to obviously see more people come and go as time goes on.
Yeah, so I think, to your point, I think Caroline Ford is an amazing actress. What she did with the character she was given was great. I think had they continued with the more alienist character from the unaired pilot, I mean, she played that really well, and in the bits where it does crop up again, she plays it really well, and I would have been really interested to see what she did with that. I can understand why they changed it if they wanted her to be the gateway character, but I think once they changed it, they were then stuck. So they established she's an alien, but then they don't know how to write her. You know, but we want her to be relatable to the kids, but we want her to be an alien. And it's like, I think they kind of wrote themselves into a corner by changing her alienness to be more relatable to Earth children.
Yeah.
in terms of her leaving, let's talk about Caroline Ford's decisions first. I completely 110% think that Caroline Ford made the right choice.
Yeah.
It must be really painful to put your heart and soul into a character, which I can tell she did with Susan, and to read a script and go, why am I the screaming character again? You know, they'd had stories that were focused 100% on character development, and her character didn't get as much as the others. Do you know?
Absolutely. And as well, like, it takes a certain amount of professional bravery to leave. Like, you may, like, be it, I think, any job that's out there, if you're not being used to the fullest extent, but it's like in a show or a movie, but it's like Doctor Who was at this stage becoming really, really popular. And I think, yeah, it took an awful lot of bravery for her or for anyone to leave the show, because it could have been a guaranteed paycheck, it could have been like a lot of notoriety, but she just said, I'm kind of worth more than what I'm being given. So yeah, I would also support her decision to leave in that regards.
Yeah, in terms of how the exit was done in the show, I think it was really well done. It was naturally built to over the course of the episode. I don't agree with the Doctor taking away Susan's agency and making the choice for her. I would have loved to have seen a scene between the two of them where he talks to her about her feelings for David.
Yeah.
As opposed to him inferring that those feelings are there.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen that discussion of, you know, oh, that young man, you know, seems to be really nice to you, and, you know, he's very respectful, and because the Doctor clearly liked him. Yeah. We said that earlier in the week, you know, like, particularly when David deferred to him as a senior member of the group and stuff like that. The Doctor clearly liked him, so I would have liked to have seen them talk about him. Because, like, you know, we know that she's upset to leave, but they don't actually discuss why she's upset to leave. So, there's that. Also, I raised the point, he took her shoe. Like, dude. She's living in, like, a sort of post-apocalyptic London. Give her shoes, for crying out loud. I do think, though, that bit at the end, because like, people always talk about that departure from the Doctor's perspective, and, you know, that departure speech, and it is a very powerful speech, but looking at it and looking at Susan, that is heart-wrenching. Like, to be told, I've locked the doors, you can't come in.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what? Like, what? And I think Caroline Ford did that really well. So, was it the best exit ever? Probably not.
No.
Was it the worst exit ever? Definitely not. I think it was... I'm glad that David Whittaker put the time and effort into it, as someone who had obviously been a story editor from the beginning and knew the characters quite well. I think he did it quite well. And yeah, it was a bittersweet exit, but I think it was the right choice for the actor, and I think it was a strong exit for the character.
Yeah, I'd agree. I suppose all we can say is thank you to Caroline Ford for giving this opportunity to have a discussion.
Indeed, and we have said this won't be the last time we see her in the role, though
Nope.
It will be the last time for a number of years.
Yes.
That we see her in the role, but we will get to see her again, which is great. And like, I do really want to go through the Big Finish stuff that has Susan. Particularly, I think I mentioned the other day the Time War stuff about Susan.
Yeah.
I really want to see what they do with that, because again, Caroline Ford comes back to do the voice, and I'm like, it's one of the things I love about Doctor Who is, and particularly with the Doctor Who connection with Big Finish, is so many of the actors who are still with us come back and reprise their character in Big Finish audiobooks. And it's like, oh, you know, you get so many episodes of them on screen and they're still willing to return to the character and create more stories. And yeah, I get it, it's a paycheck, but I'm sure there's a certain level of joy and stuff behind it as well.
especially for the ones that departed from the show not on the best of terms, like in terms of like say Colin Baker, or even with Paul McGann, like who did the movie but was able to come back and he found a huge lease on life with the Eighth Doctor. So
Oh yeah.
and like as well, like you can tell just from their interactions with fans and everything, like even seeing them online, they relish the opportunity to work in the role again via Big Finish. So again, to Big Finish, thank you very much for giving the actors this opportunity as well.
Yeah. In terms of Caroline Ford, I think, I've been to a number of Doctor Who conventions over the years, a number of conventions that have Doctor Who actors at them. I will say now, Caroline Ford has been added to my list of Doctor Who alumni that I really want to meet.
Yeah.
She wasn't on my list before. It would have been fun to meet her before.
Yeah.
But having now watched her stories in order and seen the amazing work that she put in, she has made it onto my list of Doctor Who actors I want to see when the world is no longer crap.
Yes.
So we've come to the end of our first companion.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to change things up a little bit just for the next couple of minutes. Paddy, how are you finding podcasting, dude?
I'm loving it. It's something that, like, this time last year, I suppose I would never have seen myself doing, because just trying to find the time to do it. So I suppose that's the one potential personal benefit that came out of the world being crap at the moment, is that it gave us a chance to, because like you and I have been, we've been friends for over 10 years, and how many hours have we spent talking about Doctor Who?
I couldn't even begin to count.
Yeah.
To be honest.
So I think this has actually kind of been good, because it's allowed us to get back to like, those old, like, lengthy talks about, the stories and the companions and the actors and stuff like that. And it's also really kind of cool, because one thing that I thought was the benefit of doing this was, when we were in college, like, we saw a lot of people that weren't willing to give Classic Who a chance because they just, I suppose, they were either told it was bad or they just didn't like the look of it without giving it a fair chance. So doing the podcast the way we were doing it, with the story summary and or having our own thought points, if it can help people, just even if that's what inspires them to go back, then it's, but hey, pretty cool. How are you finding doing the podcast?
I'm finding it really fun. I think, we've made several mention to the world currently being crap. At the time of recording this, it is August 2020, and COVID-19 is still running rampant across the globe. Mm-hmm. So, in the last March, April, May, June, July, August, in the last 6 months, I think you and I have seen each other in person maybe 4 times.
About that.
And Paddy lives 5 kilometers from my house, so it's not like he's very far away.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that this gave us a chance to have these conversations that we love to have. It also gives you and I a chance to hang out.
Yeah.
Remotely in this very, very troubling time. And it's been a nice, I won't say distraction, because I treat it as more than that. But it's been a nice escape from the way the world currently is.
Yeah.
To get to this point. One of the things that I really love about it as well is, like you said, there are so many people over the years who we met who refused to watch the classic show. There are certain people in particular who jump to mind.
Yeah.
And, as much as we would tell them, oh, no, it was actually great, and, Ian and Barbara are great characters, or, Liz Shaw is brilliant and stuff like that. I think this platform gives us the opportunity to go into that in as much detail as we need to. And I'm really, really enjoying that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, one of the other things I'm really enjoying as well is, throughout this whole COVID situation and doing this podcast, is just the connections that we've made by doing it.
Oh yeah.
And an example of that would be, there's a New Zealand podcast called Half Measures, and I met one of the hosts of that show at a Patreon hangout for a different podcast again called Mission Log, and through, them listening to our show and tweeting out about us and us tweeting back and stuff like that, we've kind of built this nice dynamic with them, which I really enjoy. And, to our listeners, in a couple of weeks, and I don't know how it's going to line up with our release schedule versus their release schedule, the guys have actually asked us to come on their podcast, which is great. I mean, I never imagined that would happen. So to have that opportunity, and the guys are great. If you've never heard of them, their podcast it's not as specific as ours. Obviously we're a Doctor Who podcast quite specifically, and that's pretty much all we discuss. But for the guys, it's a bit broader. They discuss movies, they discuss TV shows, they discuss other podcasts. Hence how we cropped up.
Yeah. Then they do like best performances from like two actors that they randomly pick, and they just have general good banter about movies and TV shows and pop culture.
Yeah, and they often target movies that maybe aren't quite mainstream. So they'll look at sort of lesser known films and stuff, which is great. So would highly recommend you go give the guys a listen. Half Measures, you can find them pretty much all over the map. And like I said, we're going to be doing a show with them in a couple of weeks, which is going to be great.
Yeah. So potentially they could be released and we could be talking about something in the future, even though it's already happened.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know how their recording schedule lines up with ours, so I don't know how that's going to work.
Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, the whole lot.
Yeah, it's a prime example of that. So I was actually going to ask you, and the guys on Half Measures are going to be asking us a number of questions as well, in relation to the podcast. But I wanted to ask you, what other podcasts do you listen to at the moment? Our listeners, if they're liking the stuff that we're doing and they want to, hear other stuff, what stuff are you listening to?
So there's I listened to the guys for Half Measures. You got me into Mission Log, which is the Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, which I love. Though I'm very slow in listening to it. The joys of being a parent to a 15-month-old child, but
15-month-old.
Yeah, you heard me. So I don't get to listen to it as much as I would like, but the guy, they have a really good dynamic, and it's really nice to hear people talking so in-depthly and so lovingly about Star Trek, which is another franchise that I do quite enjoy. Another podcast, again, that you got me into was the Get Into Gate guys in Australia. They listen to Stargate. So again, slow pace. And then because I'm a wrestling fan, there are Chris Jericho's podcast, which again, mostly down to wrestling, but they do talk some random stuff as well. But my main focus will probably be on the Mission Log and the Half Measures guys. How about yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I think the podcast that originally got me into podcasting is actually one from years and years ago. I don't think he even releases any episodes now, and to put in context, it was back when I had an iPhone, which was, before I started my current job, so it was over 6 years ago. Was actually Radio Free Burrito, with Will Wheaton, which was just this weird podcast. I don't even know how to describe it. He'd play, adverts from the 50s and 60s, and he'd talk general nonsense as you do on a podcast. He'd read out stories that he'd written. It was this weird introduction for me to this world of podcasting and the audio medium. After that, the main ones that I listen to at the moment are Mission Log. Like we said, I started listening to Mission Log maybe 2 years ago. For context, the guys review every episode of Star Trek. They started with the original series. They're currently, at the time of this recording, on Deep Space Nine, and I literally binged all of their stuff to catch up when I first started listening to them. So in 2 years, I've caught up on what is probably 7 years of work for the guys. Their stuff is great. Get Into Gate, like we said, which is a similar thing, but with Stargate. There's also another one that I love, which is Recommissioned, which is a Battlestar Galactica podcast. Then, in terms of Mission Log, like I said, Mission Log is a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. The Roddenberry Network has lots of other podcasts as well, and another one I really enjoy is Women at Warp, which is basically 4 women Star Trek fans talking about Star Trek, how it represents women, how it represents LGBTQ plus culture, how it represents, people of color. It's really, really great because as opposed to talking about individual episodes, which most of the other podcasts I listen to do, they talk about more, broader concepts. And lastly, and I know I have a few, but this is just, I literally just pulled up my Spotify and just saw all the ones that I'm following. The last one is the Lady Bam podcast. I don't know if I've shared this one with you before, Paddy.
You haven't.
It's Mary McDonnell, the actress.
Ooh.
Otherwise known as Madam President from Battlestar Galactica. And there's only been 15 episodes since 2018. But she did an interview with Gates McFadden. She did an interview with Katie Sackhoff. She did some other Battlestar Galactica people. She did an interview with Kate Mulgrew and Marina Sirtis. And it's so great to listen to one of my favorite actors doing their own podcast. It's like with the Will Wheaton thing. I'm like, I don't care what they're talking about. I just want to listen to it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that the current world situation has done. It's inspired a lot of actors to kind of just sit down and do their own podcasts, like the David Tennant one, which I don't think either of us have listened to yet, but must actually listen to it at some point. I'd be kind of keen to see that because I love David Tennant.
Yeah, and what we'll probably do with this episode is we probably won't put it in the episode description because it'll probably get a bit long, but in the Facebook, Twitter and Instagram updates, we'll tag as many of these podcasts as we can. So we'll tag their handles and stuff so you can go and listen to their stuff if it's something that you would be interested in.
Yes, definitely do. Because a friend of mine from work, I think he's an even bigger Star Trek head than you and I are. He's into podcasts, and I put this onto him. Now, I don't know whether he listened to it or not yet, but it's the type of podcast that if you like talking about Star Trek in terms of the real core of the characters and the messages behind it, then Mission Log is the one for you, I think.
Yeah, the guys are absolutely amazing, and I will say I need to give a massive shout out to the guys from Mission Log. When we first started talking about doing something like this, we talked about this ages ago. Yeah,
it was originally meant to be a YouTube channel.
Yeah, this has come in so many different forms, and it was before lockdown. It was a little bit before lockdown. I became a patron of Mission Log on Patreon, and I started sending messages to the guys and chatting with them and stuff like that. And they do sometimes monthly, sometimes bi-monthly Patreon hangout where you actually get to go and talk to them. And I really love their setup, but one of the things that being a Patreon member for them gave me access to is that they release a video of them recording their podcast. And even though I probably should have realized it sooner, like I said, I'd binge 7 years worth of their stuff in, as many months. I hadn't realized that they actually recorded from separate locations. I thought that they were in a studio.
So did I.
But they're actually in separate locations. And so once I saw that, I sent them a message and I was like, hey, I'd be really interested in learning more about how you guys managed to do that. And the two of them were so, so helpful. They gave some really helpful tips. They recommended some software that we can use. They gave some really good advice on just, podcasting in general. And ever since I sent them that first message, they've, brought it up in several of their sort of Patreon exclusive recording content, which is their unedited version of their show. So between acts of their show, they talk about stuff that was going on, and they'd be like, oh, and also, Tricia, I hope you're doing really well with this, or Tricia, I hope you had an opportunity to look at that. Every time we have a Patreon hangout, they always ask me how it's doing, and that's how me and Paul from Half Measures got to know each other. Was they sort of gave us, hey guys, give your elevator pitch for your podcast, and they gave us the audience to do that. So I really must give a massive thanks to the guys, because I don't think we would have done this if I hadn't had that conversation with them.
Yeah. So I think that like it's this way, like obviously it'd be great like if we could actually do it from the same location, but for however long this goes on, this is just, you know, it's the next best thing, and it's working really well, I think.
Definitely. So was there anything else you wanted to include in today's rambling in the TARDIS?
Not much. Other than you can expect these kind of things popping up every now and again, guys, because every time a companion leaves, I think it's an event to talk about, be it whether it's a good reason for leaving or a bad reason for leaving, i.e. death. So you can expect stuff like this, and again, obviously, when the Doctor whenever the time the Doctor leaves, we'll be doing a bit retrospective about that. So I think as well, like it's just nice to have like these small little bonus things for people to break up the week long wait for the next episode.
Yeah. When you and I were first coming up with the idea for the show, we immediately wanted to do something where we wouldn't have to be as scripted as we usually are.
Yeah.
Paddy is the one who came up with the title Ramblings in the TARDIS, so kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
But yeah, so you can expect these, you know, anytime a companion or a Doctor leaves. We may do others as well, like if there's a topic we want to discuss in a bit more detail that we think would go on for way too long in a normal episode discussion, you may see these pop up. And usually, touch wood, they'll be on a Wednesday after our standard normal Monday uploading schedule. But if you want to keep track and keep an eye out for when we're going to be having these discussions, or if you want to leave us any feedback or comments that we may include in a future discussion, as Paddy said at the top of the episode, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TimeTeamp. That's TimeTeamp. Or you can email us at timetravelingteamp@teamproductions.com.
And one last thing I would just like to say as well, that if you're interested to see some of the stories that we've discussed or ones coming up, but you don't have access to them via either DVD, a lot of new streaming services, so you're like your BritBox or HBO Max, have actually gotten the rights to Classic Who, so they're all up there for streaming if they're available in your region. So I would highly recommend to check them out.
Definitely.
So I suppose that's it, guys.
Yep. This is kind of weird because we don't usually sign off these things.
I know, it's just okay. Sure, we'll just do it. So guys, until next time, bye.
Bye.